Voilà, merci. Hello everybody, I am quite aware that it's rather early and not everybody's here yet, but I think because we've got a wonderfully packed programme with a fantastic load of speakers who I've had a chance to talk to a little bit in advance, it sounds like a cracking hour and a half, so if we don't crack on now, it'll be too late. So welcome to all of you, thank you for getting here on time. I hope you had a really good night in Brussels if you slept here last night, and otherwise if you've just arrived, welcome to Brussels. We hope you're going to enjoy the rest of the conference, especially this very first item this morning. I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping first. Where you came in is also the exit. That's nice and easy. Our interpreters are in the booth, where the whole conference is in English, but we have number 2 is the French booth, number 3 is the German. So if you need a translation, go and get some headphones now from the info desk, because otherwise it'll all be in English, washing over your head. What we're doing now is being streamed on the web, so your friends can see you back home. And also, if you ask a question, and we're looking forward to your questions, that's the most important part of the whole conference, is what's emanating from you when you hear some of our speakers. So please ask questions galore, because the time runs out very quickly. And if you don't want your face to be seen, then don't ask a question, because it goes on the webcast. We have a wonderful technology here, and if you go and take your Connects Me app, if you look for that, I'm sure you've already seen it in your bag. The code is 2604, and in your bag you have full instructions on how to use that, which means that you can even ask questions during this whole session. So I won't delay much further, but I'll introduce you a little bit to our subject. More than half of us live in cities these days. Put up your hands if you live in a town or city. Yeah, it's well over half. How many of you live in the countryside? You see, far less. How many of you live by the sea? Oh, not bad. Oh, not bad at all. About the same as in the countryside. Right, thank you. Well, the World Health Organization says that worldwide, 9 out of 10 of us breathe highly polluted air. That is quite scary. And I'm not sure what the air in Brussels is doing to all of us at the moment, but then there's also pollution in our soil, our water, noise levels, even household cleaners, paints, perfume sprays. But you might not have thought about beautiful parks in your cities and the pesticides that might be being sprayed there. So we're going to hear a little bit about that, which will open our eyes today. And in this session, we're concentrating on what the EU is doing in research and innovation to seek sustainable solutions and make life in cities far healthier than it is at the moment. We'll look at some of the initiatives which local authorities in parts of Europe are taking, and then we'll explore what further ideas might improve our well-being in our cities. Over 2 years ago, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development came into force, and many of these goals are in fact connected with health. The EU's current research and innovation programme, Horizon 2020, provides the finance and support to help achieve these goals. So one of the things we're looking at is the future of how we can work also, maybe to pollute less, to commute less, and so on. But now I will introduce you to a fantastic team of speakers. The first one, Tuomo Karjalainen, has set up the whole programme and this whole meticulous session extremely thoroughly. Tuomo, you'll hear from him later. Laura Fleming from my old University of Exeter, my heart goes out. It would be lovely to hear from you. Dora Almasi, who I met several years ago in Cornwall and has turned up again, which is great, in a much higher capacity. David Rojas Rueda, or David, very nice to meet you. I'm glad that the Spanish transport allowed you to come. Piroska Kiss, who is from here, and Malin Kulmer from Sweden. And those two will give practical examples and also want some of your contributions. I'll introduce you to more details shortly, and of course we want your questions above all. So, to start us off then, an introduction from the European Commission. Dr. Tuomo Karjalainen has degrees from Stockholm and from Indiana in the USA, where he has a PhD in experimental pathology. He lectured in microbiology and molecular biology in Paris, so you see he's got a very good background in all forms of health, and now he manages research projects and policy support in environment and health at the EC in Brussels. So yours is the floor, Tuomo.
Thank you very much for the very nice introduction, and I'm happy that quite a few people here. So this session is a cooperation between two DGs in the Commission, the DG Research and Innovation, where I work, and my colleague Piroska, who works in DG Sante, which is the DG Health and Food Safety. I work in the Health Directorate of DG Research and Innovation, and we fund research through the framework programs. Currently we are in the Horizon 2020 program, and we already are working on the next framework program, FP9, which will be called Horizon Europe. I work in the environment and health area, and we have funded a lot of research on environment and health issues. We have spent about 1.2 billion euros in the past, let's say, 18 years on environment and health projects. And we have very large stakeholder community. We had in FP7, the 7th framework program, we had over 1,000 institutions from 68 countries that participated. And we currently spend about 100 million euros per year on environment and health research. So, as was mentioned by the moderator, the main aim, at least from our point of view, is to highlight what the EU is doing through its framework programs to promote the understanding of the impact of urbanization, natural environment, and nature-based solutions on human health and well-being. Now I give the word to my colleague,
Thank you very
Piroska.
much. I am from the DG Health and Food Safety. Our Directorate General of the European Commission deals with food safety and public health, including the monitoring of the relevant EU legislation. We carry out audits. It's actually the Directorate F, where I work, which do audits of the relevant EU legislation, including plant protection products. And our directorate is responsible for the sustainable use of pesticides.
Okay.
There, thank you.
Is it on? Hello? Yes. Our first speaker is from my old University of Exeter, Professor Dora Fleming, and she's got over 30 years' experience in environment and human health. She's director at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health and chairs the Oceans Epidemiology and Human Health at Exeter University's Medical School. Dora will be demonstrating how people who live in cities can benefit from nature-based environment solutions. She'll concentrate on Blue Health, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is a pan-European research program looking at the links between environment, climate, and health. The program is about trying to understand how water-based environments in towns and cities can affect health and well-being. So looking forward to hear what you have to say, Dora. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Renee and to Tuomo for arranging the session, and to our funder, Horizons 2020. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of this project called Blue Health, and then we'll show a very short film, assuming I can get the technology to work. When we think about the challenges to society, I try and have a very global view of it. From the point of view of human health, globally, we are all aging. There are increasingly prevalence and incidence of chronic diseases, and inequalities of all different types are rising. When I think about from the point of view of the climate, obviously it's global climate change. But when I think about it also, I think we have to think about other environmental change. For example, increasing chemicals in our environment, changes in land use. And I think the real issue here is that as researchers and scientists and as people of this planet, we need to think about the interactions of all these different issues. And both not only the risks, and you'll hear a lot about risks at these conferences, but also the benefits. I think we need to switch from treatment and waiting for something to happen to prevention, and think over the life course about what people's quality of life is, not just their longevity, and also what the quality of the environment is. So where are the gaps in terms of health and well-being in the natural environment, which is the area that Blue Health is very focused on? We know a lot now about green space. We believe that we have the evidence that shows that interacting with green space is good for health and well-being. What we don't seem to have as much information about, and it would seem to be obvious, is how interacting with blue space can be good for you, particularly the issue of using blue space infrastructure in growing urban areas, as Renee mentioned, to help our health and well-being. And I would argue, and of course I'm partisan, that if you look at water, oceans, blue space, it underlies all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we are lucky enough to have a research project that allows us to work in Europe and beyond. And why Europe? Why Europe for blue space? Well, Europe has a huge amount of coastline. It also has a lot of water resources. Many of the major cities are coastal cities, both historically and currently. Increasing the populations are moving to these areas, particularly, by the way, in retirement if they can afford it. And also, most people in Europe are within either freshwater or the coasts at this point. And there's a huge amount of economic activity associated with that. We are lucky enough to have funding from Horizon 2020 program. These are my colleagues and partners throughout Europe, all of them in coastal countries, but we also are studying countries that are landlocked. And what we're trying to do is develop the evidence, the exemplars, the tools, the policies to see whether or not blue environments can improve health and well-being. We're doing this by looking at existing data, studying large data sets, and also a very large blue health survey that you'll hear about. We are doing in situ interventions, little exemplars, and we're even trying to take it into places like care homes by using virtual reality to bring blue spaces to people who can't get access to them. We also work with groups such as RIVM who are doing scenario planning. What do we say in the future? And how do we translate this for policymakers? And finally, we're trying to engage as many stakeholders, and you're some of them, across Europe and beyond. So now, and this is where I am technologically challenged, I'm going to ask Philippe, hopefully, to give us a short video. And this, one of the reasons I like this is it showcases the early career researchers who are involved in the Blue Health Project, who I think of as the future in terms of blue health and our science going forward.
The Blue Health Survey is a pan-European survey, so it's going to be delivered to 11 countries across Europe, and what we're really trying to achieve is to find out how different kinds of
like I said, technology.
natural environments, particularly those with water in them, like the coasts, seas and lakes and rivers, for example, how these affect people's health. The sorts of questions we'll be asking people are how much did they enjoy their last visit to one of these kinds of aquatic spaces, and what kind of things they did when they went there, who they went with, did they take a dog, what kinds of activities did they undertake, and how did they feel after doing them. And using this kind of information, we can really start to make judgments about how these visits impact both public health and the wider economy of these individual countries.
The task of the team of Estonian University of Life Sciences is so-called urban acupuncture, and this is a term in architecture, landscape architecture theory, which means a very small scale intervention. The example could be, let's say, wooden path along the river or the lake, which is really simple and cheap to build, but in terms of usability of the area, it brings a great change.
We are critically looking into all the projects all over the world, which has been done close to the water, as kind of a waterfront regeneration projects. It could be small, it could be large, to understand the criteria to make the place successful. When we're looking into the projects, we're looking into the blue space tanks. What kind of land and water interface they're dealing with? What kind of built environment is around the project? That's important. The scale of impact the project has over a larger geographical location. It's also important thing is to look into the climate it has been designed in. I mean, that's where that reflects the cultural views of this. Once you're done with the project review, we will be able to understand the criteria that make the project successful. And this is what we're going to take away for our research, and we are going to use these criteria to build our interventions in Estonia.
The aim of this project is to investigate which are the health effects of doing physical activity near blue spaces. It will be office workers from a building which is in the seafront of Barcelona. What they will be asked to do is to participate in the study for 3 weeks, 3 weeks of 4 days each week. And 1 week they will have to walk along the beach in Barcelona. The other week they will have to walk along different streets in Barcelona without blue areas or green areas. And the third week they will have to spend 20 minutes in the office just resting, and this is because they will serve as self-controls.
Basically, what we try to achieve in Blue Health is to see if we can apply virtual reality technology for a group that I believe really need virtual reality. Sometimes we see virtual reality being pushed into areas where it's like just becoming a gimmick. But here what we see is elderly people, for example, in elderly care centers, maybe don't get out that much, maybe don't get that many visitors. We know it can be quite difficult for some of these people to get out in nature. So what we're thinking is, if you can't bring them to nature, why not bring nature to them instead? And that's what we want to try to do in Blue Health. Basically trying to build a virtual reality system you can bring into, for example, elderly care center, and have the people there getting all sorts of different experiences on nature.
A scenario is basically a projection to the future, and that's really relevant for policymakers to assess which options are best for, in this case, blue infrastructure. To formulate such scenarios, we need to identify lots of trends, and those trends, they could be ecological, so that's, for example, climate change. Could be technological, trends could also be economic, so that it's really diverse, and by combining such trends we can identify which scenarios might be possible in the nearby future.
I personally, I find that what we are doing is important. I truly do. The research in landscape architecture is not very developed. You cannot compare it with medicine, science, or it's really in the baby phase. And before that, we were quite speculative about what is good public space, what really is good for people, and in this project we really get the chance to see whether it's really like this, whether we can have some evidence which will, of course, support or move the practice in different direction. So I think it's exciting.
Thank you very much to my colleagues.
Thank you very much as well for starting us off in such a positive way. And I like the idea of more water around, because you can feel it's healing. Also the fact that you're aware that an aging population will need not just to be able to exist for like 10 years in semi-comatose state, but actually to have quality of life and feel excited. And I'd love to see our rivers and lakes cleared up so that we've all got a beach in every town that we can just go to and swim. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dora Almasi. And Dora's involved in the Horizon 2020 Naturvation project. Naturvation is about nature-based solutions for urban innovation and staying as close to nature as possible in an urban situation. She's been working on a database, the Urban Nature Atlas, which we'll hear more about, and it's got nearly 1,000 examples of nature-based solutions across 100 European cities. They're solutions that can also deal with health challenges by helping to provide healthy working environments, encouraging healthy lifestyles, creating opportunities for recreation and leisure, and providing healthy, locally produced and non-toxic food. I hope we're not going in the other direction. Dora will be choosing a couple of examples to show us what it's all about from her database. So tell us more, Dora. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee, for the introduction and for the invitation. May I get the first slide after the... Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So, as Renee mentioned, our project is called Naturvation. It's also a Horizon 2020 project. It's a 4-year research project. It started last year, and it involves 14 research institutions and universities from across Europe. And we are studying nature-based solutions, or so-called nature-based urban innovations. We try to understand what are their benefits for cities, how can they bring innovation, and how can they address modern urban sustainability challenges, such as climate change, or water management, health issues, and others. So what are nature-based solutions? There are various ways they can be presented or found in cities. They can be community gardens, green buildings, green roofs, or green facades. They can be greened grey infrastructures, such as railroads, tramways, riversides. They can also be water management solutions, for example, rain gardens or sustainable urban drainage solutions. But they can also be simple green spaces in the neighborhood or parks, which are in a way or another adapted for addressing these modern urban sustainability challenges. They provide space for recreation, or they absorb excess water coming from floods or storms, and so on. So in the first year of our project, we tried to map how nature-based solutions or nature-based urban innovations look like across Europe. And we decided to develop an urban nature atlas. The data collection happened between July and August last year, and we aimed to collect 1,000 examples from 100 cities. We almost managed, and we processed in our database more than 950 examples. And we launched an online version of this database on the project website. If you go to the project website, which is naturvation.eu, under the Explore button, you will find the Urban Nature Atlas. It provides an interactive way for visitors to explore, as I mentioned, more than 950 different nature-based solutions from across 100 cities of Europe. Visitors can search by icons, but we also provide various other ways, like advanced filters, to search for different types of intervention based on city, country, urban setting, challenge that they address, and so on. Just a few words about the data collection. So we try to understand what are these solutions about, how they look like, what kind of challenges they address, but we also looked into the governance arrangement, the financing that is behind these projects, what kind of innovations they bring, and how they are being assessed and evaluated. All of the information that we uploaded to the atlas are based on factual information. We used secondary resources, and we used the methodological discourse analysis to extract the data. So we found that almost all of these projects are bringing more green to the city. But in addition to this, we found that they are also very well placed to improve environmental quality, to help with regeneration and land use in the cities, address water management challenges or climate change issues. And more than half of the project provided benefits for health and well-being of the citizens, as you see here. So when we looked at the projects, we found that many of these nature-based urban innovations can provide a healthier working environment. They can bring leisure opportunities for the citizens and recreation opportunities. They can contribute to improve mental health. They can create opportunities for educating the citizens about food, or even producing local and healthy food, more healthy food. We also found that certain type of nature-based solutions are better placed to improve health of the citizens. These are the community gardens, parks, or simple green grey infrastructures, and external building greens such as green roofs or green facades. This is an example from Milan. This is a community garden project in local schools. They created opportunities for students to get acquainted with food production and also produce their own food. This is another project from Ljubljana, Slovenia. The city renovated the riverside of the Sava River. They built green playgrounds, riverbank greens, bigger parks along the river, and helped the citizens to use a previously abandoned and even dangerous area for recreation, leisure, sports, and to contribute to their health and well-being. This is the last project that I would like to show. This is from Liverpool. This is a hospital, a children's hospital, and it is a green building, green inside and green outside, and it provides different opportunities for children to be outside in the green. For example, there are green playgrounds around, but also it is used for food production, and the food that is produced around or on the building is contributing to the canteen of the hospital. So as you see, the projects that we have in the database, in the Urban Nature Atlas, provide really various opportunities to contribute to the health and well-being of European citizens, and I can only encourage you to visit the website and look for other projects. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dora. That was very uplifting and positive, and I have to say that hospitals will soon become so cheerful. They'll have Laura's projections inside of sort of lovely scenes on the walls, and your vegetables growing in the grounds. It won't be the same at all. So thank you very much for that. And now we go to Spain with David Rojas Riedo. And David studied in Mexico. He's an epidemiologist working in environmental health at the Barcelona Institute of Global Health. David's worked in Europe, Africa, America, you name it. Not in Antarctica yet, probably. Participated in the rather tasty-sounding projects of Helix, Pasta, and Tapas 1 and 2, nearly lunchtime. I shall leave David to explain what it all means, although I did read it on your website, but I think you'll tell it better than me. He specializes in the kind of things which stress us in our surroundings over a lifetime, and of course that means in our towns, whether it's noise, pollution, and so on, and what difference this actually is making to our life expectancy. And so the idea is to help improve our environments and pass on the results to people working in public health in those towns and cities. And that would improve the air, green spaces, exercise, and even the diet of the public. So let's hear from your research, David. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation. I was very glad to be here and had the possibility to present the projects that European Union Commission funded for for environmental health. I will introduce you two different projects that we have just ended, and the first is PASTA. PASTA means physical activity through active transportation policies. And it's a European Union project and working in 7 different cities. And the general idea is to identify what kind of policies really provide better commuting ways, active transportation, and what that means for the health of the citizens. And when we start the project, we first try to measure what actually is the contribution of health related with the urban design and the transport policies. We know that the air pollution, traffic noise is one of the main risk factors, the main risk factors related with urban design and transportation, but also the lack of green spaces. Are highly related with the health, and that's also related with the policies, urban design and transportation, or the heat island effects, or even the physical activity or the lack of physical activity between the citizens, is because also the built environment is not inviting them to do this physical activity. Then this is the case of Barcelona, and here you will see different maps of Barcelona. And here you have the sea, here you have the mountain, and the darkest areas in the top maps are the areas with highest concentration of air pollution and highest concentration of traffic noise. And the maps that you have here, you have the areas with have the heat island effects, and also here in darkest areas you have the areas with the lack of access to green spaces. This is all drive for the urban design of the city. Barcelona is a lovely city, and many people like the city. I love the city, to be honest. I like to walk and see the sea, but actually we have a lot of problems. It's a very dense city, and we have a lot of exposures. Then we wanted to quantify what is actually the burden of the city related with this excess of environmental risk exposures. And we quantify in terms of disability adjusted life years. In other ways, we also quantified that 20% of the premature deaths presented in the city can be avoided if we improve this built environment. 20% is a lot. It's something that, as a medical doctor, I cannot change this with the easy consultations with the patients. These policies, transport and urban design policies, can really drive public health through all the populations. And you can see here the different environmental risk exposures that are associated with the urban design. And mostly you see, and this is the first time we put all together in a city level, and you see here noise, traffic noise is one of the biggest, if not is the biggest environmental risk exposure in Barcelona. And normally it's not considered like a noise, traffic noise is really important, but in Barcelona it's the most important of all, more than air pollution. Then we have a huge problem in terms of traffic noise. Then after that, we decided what kind of policies actually will improve the urban environment. And then there are many infrastructure. Bicycling infrastructure will be one of these policies, and we wanted to assess what is the possibilities or the opportunities of the bicycle infrastructure through Europe that can improve the modal share by bicycling. If we increase all the bike lanes in the cities in Europe, this is 167 cities in Europe, we can achieve, we can increase 25% of the modal share by bicycles. And what that means in the cities, that if we achieve that, if we invest in bike lanes, we can prevent 10,000 deaths each year in those cities, because we are promoting physical activity. Then we also wanted to see what happens, this is mainly in adults, what happens in children, and that's the reason we also started to work in another project that called Helix. And Helix was focused on children, and we wanted to assess walking to school policies. In this case, we measure what is the impact of walking to school promotion between physical activity, air pollution, traffic injuries. And this is the case of Barcelona again, and what will happens if we have all the children to live less than 1 kilometer to the schools walking to school. And this is a number of diseases that we can prevent or reduce each year in those related to physical activity. There's a tiny increase in diseases related with increase in inhalation of air pollution, and a huge reduction in terms of minor injuries. The general idea here is like a walking to school policies, at least in the case of Barcelona, will be very helpful for the health of the children. Then the Helix project is try to go beyond to different environmental risk factors. I try to include multiple environmental risk factors, and also try to explain what is the pathways, the biological pathways that these environmental risk factors produce health benefits or damage, and try to translate that in actual policies and try to put in the urban context. And the Helix project tried to do measurements, tried to provide devices, smartphones, apps, and also satellite data to try to characterize the exposure in different populations, in this case the children. And we provide also backpacks with different devices to the children, and the children were walking and doing their lives in the city. And this is actually the map of Barcelona. You have here the layer of NO2, one is air pollution, and here this line that you hear and see, this blue line, purple line, is actually one of the volunteers that we have measured what is the route, but also the height of this line is the intensity of physical activity. In this map, we have air pollution exposure and also physical activity exposure. The idea is to really characterize what is the exposure, the mix of exposure when you do your normal life in the cities. What's happening here? Oh, this is me. Oh, is there? Sorry for that. Yeah. Then the general idea of the Helix project is also to provide the overall burden of disease of environmental risk factors in the European Union 28. And we measure and to quantify what is the main environmental risk factor for children in Europe. And we've quantified that air pollution is still the most important environmental risk factor for children in Europe. And you can see here is particles and ozone, followed by secondhand smoke. We need more policies focused to reduce exposure of children to these environmental risk factors in Europe. Key messages, there are multiple co-benefits of good urban design. It's not only air pollution or noise, it's also physical activities, green spaces, it's heat island effects. Noise is a really important environmental risk factors, and normally the people is not taking in mind that traffic noise is important. And active transportation policies have more benefits than risks. Often they ask us as, well, if you do physical activity in a place like Barcelona that is very polluted, it's good for my health, and you put this kind of balance and the trade-off, and the benefits is 70 times bigger than the risks. And in terms of Helix, what is the key message is that this was the first time we have exposed some database on early life. This has also provided a new perspective of multiple environmental exposures for children. And this has helped us to understand what is the urban design providing the different exposure. The idea is in the future we can also provide this kind of information, more comprehensive environmental risk factors to provide a better policies for urban design and transportation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. You've got a huge amount in a very short time. Thank you for that. I'm curious, and we may discuss it later, to know how you measure the number of people who are ill or dying as a direct relation of noise. That would be interesting to know about the measurements. Your walking to school experiment was extremely revealing. Thank you. That was fabulous. Thanks so much. And we're going to jump now into parks, back into green spaces, with both Piroshka Kish and Malin Kulma. We're going to have Piroshka first, talking about pesticides in our parks. Piroshka is an auditor at DG Health and Food Safety. She graduated in agricultural engineering, specializing in plant protection. And at the Commission here, she's worked with genetic modification, plant health, and pesticides. Piroshka will give a short introduction on the EU's policy on sustainable use of pesticides. Piroshka.
Thank you very much, Renee. I would like to have the presentation, please, Philippe. Yeah, I know. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I got it. Yes, thank you very much. Now I will speak briefly about the sustainable use of pesticides in the European Union. EU citizens are concerned about pesticides. First, let's see what are pesticides. A pesticide prevents, destroys or controls harmful organisms, which can be pests or diseases. Pesticides include plant protection products, which are primarily used in the agricultural sectors, and biocides, which are used in non-agricultural purposes. This presentation will refer to plant protection products. if you would like to learn more about pesticides, you can find this infographic. If you Google EU pesticide explain, you will get directly to this infographic for further information. So EU citizens are concerned about pesticides, but pesticides can be used in a sustainable way. The main objective to achieve the sustainable use of pesticides is by reducing the risks and impact of pesticide use on human health and the environment, and promoting the use of integrated pest management and of alternative approaches and techniques. How can we achieve sustainable use of pesticides? In the European Union, we have the directive on the sustainable use of pesticides, which was adopted and indeed has been implemented by member states. This directive specifies a number of issues. It requires member states to prepare national action plans and implement these plans to reduce the risks and impact of pesticide use. This directive requires training for professional users of pesticides. The directive also requires member states to provide information and raise awareness of public in relation to pesticides. Pesticide application equipments must be inspected. This is also required by the directive. The directive bans the area spraying, and integrated pest management must be promoted by member states and implemented by all professional users. The EU member states are required to put in place specific measures to protect the aquatic environment and drinking water supplies. And also, member states need to minimize the use of pesticides in specific areas, such as public parks, gardens, sport and recreation grounds, school grounds and children playgrounds, and in close vicinity of healthcare facilities. But we will learn more about it in the next presentation. So how can we grow further? This year and next year, the European Commission will carry out audits in member states on the implementation of the Sustainable Use Directive. The Commission will establish harmonized risk indicators at EU level. We will work more on integrated pest management. The Commission will evaluate the revised national action plans of the member states, and the Commission will report on the implementation of the directive, or the Sustainable Use Directive, to the European Parliament and the Council. To grow further, we need to work even more closely together. We, the European Union member states, the regions and municipalities, the European Commission, farmers and citizens, so everyone. If you would like to have more information about the sustainable use of pesticides, if you Google EU sustainable use of pesticides, you will find this starting page. And also this Prezi is in the public domain of the prezi.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Piroshka, and I'm glad to hear there is a directive. I might ask you a little more searchingly later how it's monitored by individual countries, whether it's responsibility of governments or local authorities to monitor that the directive is being carried out. But that was very interesting indeed. Before we go further, just to say I've had a message saying that some of you apparently are writing questions, and it may be people watching the web streaming as well who are watching now. But we are in session 2.3 And some of your questions are coming through in the wrong session. So make sure that it's the health session and it's session 2.3. And if you've asked a question online, then ask it again in the right session. Thank you very much. And thank you, Piroshka. And now we come to the other half, really, about pesticides, which is Malin Kulmer. Malin's going to present a case study of pesticide use in the cities, which is what Piroshka introduced. Malin's from Sweden, and she's an environmental inspector in Helsingborg. Malin has a master's degree in horticulture and previous experience in plant breeding, so she knows it from the grassroots, as it were. She's worked on environmental information for farmers on subjects like water, nutrients, and the safe use of crop protection products. Malin will be able to make, if you can help both of them, Piroshka and Malin, they'd very much like your suggestions, or even suggestions on the web from those who are watching, ideas on how the EU directive could be improved and how we could best serve our plants and our cities without polluting our plants, but yet keeping them fresh and free from bugs and so on. So over to you, Malin, for the case study.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to talk about some practical examples, how we apply the Sustainable Use Directive in our small city. Helsingborg, we don't have any environmental program. Instead, we have a program for quality of life. And that's a new way of thinking of old challenges. It includes both environment and public health. So we try to contextualize our work for sustainable development in terms connected to the individual quality of life. And sustainable use of pesticide is one part of this. So, where are we? We're in the south of Sweden, in a city of 140,000 inhabitants. We live, it's situated on the coast. It's growing rapidly. We have parks, water protection areas, industries, ports and beaches within the city. So there's a challenge. We work systematically with a sustainable use. We have our own organic farming, and 46% of the purchased food is organic. The national goal for Sweden is 60%, and this is to reduce the pesticide amount. But the actual work connected to the Sustainable Use Directive is the one in the bluish rings. We work with directed information to different groups of users, for instance, park keepers and greenhouse keepers. And we have sector meetings for specific groups too. We have them for the golf courses, and we have them for the farmers, where we actually both inform and discuss about pesticide to reach out with our informations. And of course, we have inspections just to see that the regulations are followed by the users. And our board of environment in the city have decided on a pesticide policy. And in that policy, the EU directive is included, we have the Swedish laws, and of course, our own interpretations of how to apply them. And that's a living document that I use in my everyday work, giving permits or not within the city. But let's get practical. We go to the examples. Two houses, one a multi-family house, apartment block, and one detached house, a single household. We always see the green spaces around a multi-family house as a public area because it's in the public access, and we have the policy of no pesticide and everyday care in that kind of area. And that's also in line with the directive to protect the public from exposure to pesticides. You can get a permit for low-risk pesticides if you have a specific reason. Other pesticides are only permitted if there's a real hazard. Let's go to the gravel areas. We do not allow pesticides for aesthetical purposes in public areas, especially not on gravel. It's a highly permeable surface with a low biological activity. Pesticides are not broken down, and it's a high risk of leaking both through the groundwater and as a surface runoff. But we do allow it in the oil port, close to the water. Sometimes. It's not a public area, and we do it for security reasons. Flammable weed close to an oil cistern, it's not a good idea. A fire could be disastrous. And we have discovered and evaluated and decided that burn or mechanically remove the weed is either too dangerous or not sufficient. Next example, football. Always engaging. On the professional court, to the right, we allow some pesticides, not all. We are quite strict there too. That's also quite a permeable surface. But it's not open to the public, and it's not intended for the children. But we do not allow it on the training court for the children. Also, but we sometimes allow low-risk pesticide on the training court, if there's a specific reason. And it's in line with the directive that vulnerable groups should not be exposed to pesticides. So we have the same policy, no pesticides in school or kindergartens or anything like that, where children stay or play. And then the last tricky one that we've had. A kindergarten in a water protection area. It was infested with severely poisonous giant hogweed that you can see to the right. That's also an invasive species. That one causes burns and blisters with sometimes lifelong effect on the skin. Pesticides are not allowed in the schoolyard and generally not allowed in the water protection areas. Usually not even to fight invasive species. As you can see, one of my colleagues deals with it mechanically. In this case, the direct threat to the children's health was weighed against the risk of polluting the water, and we had to think twice about this one. But we decided to make an exception to allow Roundup, a glyphosate product, because the alternative was to close the kindergarten, and the risk for the water was not that high. So, why have we reached to this kind of level of restriction against pesticides within the city? We do believe it's because when we communicate about pesticide, we talk about adding values instead of reducing risks. Clean water, more bees, more butterflies. And both politicians and the pesticide users can correspond to this. And from this, our politicians have dared to make inconvenient decisions. And the users, hopefully, listens, take in the message, and use the pesticides more wisely next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Malin. The standard of speakers has been amazing this morning, actually, and that rounds it off beautifully. I have to say that your Helsingborg, or overall in Sweden, quality of life seems to be setting a shining example to the rest of Europe, with an aim of 60% organic food is pretty good. You're thinking of quality of life and not even spraying private gardens. I mean, that is really very go ahead, and I wish people would listen to that. But thanks ever so much. Before we go any further, this is your moment. It's always very short, and people's questions tend to gallop at the end. So if I were you, I'd try and get in early with your questions. But first, both Piroshka and Malin would like some suggestions as to how the EU and member states can actually help to improve this directive of the implementation of pesticides. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Henriette Christensen and I work for Pesticide Action Network. We have a campaign since 3 years on pesticide-free towns. So therefore we have been collecting all these examples all over Europe because many countries has decided to go pesticide-free. So Sweden has since many, many years a ban on using pesticides on hard surfaces. And in France, in Luxembourg, in Holland and in Belgium are all pesticide-free. So when you walk in the streets around Brussels, you will see wheat. That's the first thing you have to do when you go pesticide-free. You have to accept higher tolerance levels. So enjoy when you go for a walk here. There's no pesticide, or at least it should be banned from 2019. And not only in the public areas, also certain pesticides, glyphosate and neonicotinoid, is banned all over Brussels. So we cannot use it for gardens, and the 7 farmers that we have in the Brussels region cannot use it. So it's a pity that we don't have an example from Brussels here, from Belgium. But I would like to come back to you because you were showing 3 places where you are using pesticides. You were talking about the oil port in Helsinki, and Helsingborg, yeah, sorry, I'm from Copenhagen, so I'm not so far away from you. But so I would like to, maybe I would like to invite you to come and come with me to see the harbor of Antwerp, because in Antwerp they are using sheep to fight some of the invasive species. So I've been trying to have them as an example, because what we try to do in our campaign is that we try to have good examples appearing so that people can learn from each other. So I would like to invite you to come with me to Antwerp. We can try to go and see them, to see what they do, to maybe learn from that. So you were talking about the Olympic fields in Helsingborg, and also there, maybe we should go to Barcelona, because in Barcelona, they don't use pesticides. They use low-risk pesticides on their sports field. And last but not least, the giant hawkweed. I would like to invite you to come to Denmark. Our NGO had to Copenhagen, sorry. Our NGO had a project with them where they were manually killing all the giant hawkweed. It was a project of 3 years, and after 2 years, they killed them with air and water. But they were doing it manually, and it worked. So I would like to invite you to come with me for these 3 places. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. That was very constructive. It's the sort of thing that these 2 want to hear. Any more suggestions on the use of pesticide before we broaden it to all the subjects that we've heard? But that was very positive. Okay, it may come. Yes, sorry.
I don't work in that area specifically.
Oh, sorry, thank you very much. Yes, Karin Dubsky from Coastwatch. While I don't work specifically in that area, I am from farming stock, and I see an increase in pesticide use in our area. And I just think, is there any requirement in the directive to give information? How often has this been sprayed? Because that would be very useful as a first step to get that information into the public, and then we would be able to take action a little bit more. It would be easier to take action than to try and worm it out.
Quite right. Very good suggestion. What do you 2 say?
Yeah, thank you very much. In the EU legislation, the directive which I talked about and the regulation 1107 from 2009 require professional pesticide users to keep records of their use. Which means what pesticides are used, where, what would be the dosage, and for what purposes. And authorities, competent authorities in the member states, do carry out inspections of that.
More for the public to know.
I know, hand over to Marlene, maybe she can help with an example.
In our city, if you have to apply pesticide in a public park, for instance, even though you have to pay to get in advance, you have to put out signs, and you have to inform our municipality, and you have to be very clear that this area we have applied pesticides. And if you know that there are children in that area, then you have to use some black and yellow tape to put it off to. But we, the municipality, decide. We make a place a risk assessment according to the place and what kind of people usually moves around in that area. And then we put on the restriction for the application.
Thank you for your question. Before we, there's one more at the back there. Thank you.
Just a comment. My name is Henrik Boss. I come from Finland and I'm a gardener. I represent landscape contractors, European Landscape Contractors Association, ELCA. We are 27 countries and roughly 150,000 companies all over Europe. And I would say you can stop using glyphosate anytime. It won't affect the beauty of your parks. So if the question about using pesticides, it's only about glyphosate, then I don't see any problem with that.
What do you think, you two?
Did I understand that was that we don't need glyphosate? Yeah. We've had some, when we had an invasive species, for instance, for my years that I've been working there, we had a giant spread. We have allowed it 2 or 3 times, and then it was we thought it was quite necessary. And sometimes there's very, very valuable historic plants that will get killed, for instance, by a fungi. And then we can also allow fungicide. And we have done that for the royal wine stocks that was in the garden. So it's for very specific occasions that we allow stronger pesticides or high-risk pesticides.
Any more on the subject before we pass on to general questions? Actually, I have a very quick one for you, if you can answer it quickly. How are 27 member states controlling the use of pesticides? What are the penalties and who actually monitors it? All the governments or what?
So the competent authorities which are in charge of the implementation of this directive do control the pesticide use, and they implement practically they are responsible for the implementation of the directive, and the European Commission, our directorate, carries out audits mainly to see the implementation of the directive. And when we do audits, generally, we produce a report and we put in recommendations as necessary, and to the competent authorities of the member states audited. And these are not just recommendations to consider, actually they are obligatory to address. The competent authorities produce action plan, and they need to implement the action plan to address the recommendation in the audit report. And this is the same for the implementation of the Sustainable Use Directive.
Okay, let's hope they do. Right, so general questions now. We've had a huge amount on quality of life, on how you'd like to see your cities in the future. What do you think we're doing wrong? How long is all this going to take anyway? Are we in cloud cuckoo land? Is it realizable? So I'd love to hear your general questions, please. Thank you. Over there.
For health, for living in an urban environment, and I wanted to know how that played out. How does noise cause health problems and deaths?
Thank you for your question. I was keen on that too.
Many thanks. A very good question. And normally, noise depends on the source, produce different health effects. And noise is considered as maybe it's annoyance and maybe it's a sleep disturbance. But actually, the noise produces a stimulus, and the stimulus to the central nervous system. And this stimulus release some hormones like epinephrine. And you see this kind of hormones control the diameter of the blood vessels, and this, when they go a little bit more smaller, increase the pressure inside of the blood vessels, and this called hypertension. Then a continuous exposure to traffic noise stimulates this kind of pathway, biological pathway, and they increase the risk of hypertension. And hypertension has been related with many other cardiovascular and cerebrovascular diseases like infarct of the heart or stroke. And that is the main causes of death that are related with traffic noise. Then we have mortality-related cardiovascular and cerebrovascular diseases related with this pathway. Transport noise is producing hypertension and cardiovascular risk factors and cardiovascular and cerebrovascular diseases that end in mortality. That's the way that we quantify these things. Yeah.
So is something that's slightly less risk, like loud music in shops, which is very irritating, can that be harmful?
Yeah, there's different things. Depends on the sources. When you have a very high level of I will not say music or noise, where else is the proper name, but they can damage the auditive system. That is other thing. But maybe when we have a background noise, the brain have the capacity to adapt to this noise, and you don't see as an annoyance so much, and you start to accept and adapt until there's a noise back, and you can continue your activities. But even that you are not conscious about the noise, this is still stimulating your organic system and your endocrine system, and this stimulated the blood pressure. That is the problem with traffic noise. And the problem with traffic noise in the case of Barcelona is so common. It's everywhere. Like almost everyone is exposed to little levels of noise. Well, at excessive levels of noise. That is the problem that affects a whole population. And when you translate that to health outcomes and health impacts, you see that because all the population is exposed, you have a lot of burden related with the traffic noise.
Thank you very much, David. Actually, I want to pass this quickly to Laura, just in case, but I have heard that noise in the oceans is actually affecting the fish. Do you know something about that because of water?
We also do work around oceans and human health, and people have looked at the issue, and I am not an expert. I urge you to talk to your local marine scientist, but definitely human-generated noise from things like fishing or shipping has caused damage, for example, to interactions between sea creatures, particularly mammals such as whales, porpoises, and also some of the work has been done around some of the signaling that has been done, sonar signaling from departments of defense and others. So yes, definitely can cause major issues for those populations.
Thanks very much. Right, next questions, please. There was a hand up. Yes, thank you.
Hi, Robert Brown, the McCarrison Society. Just on the issue of kind of pesticides and terminology, might it be helpful to actually use subclasses? So I suppose biocides, weed killers, pesticides, fungicides. I wouldn't have thought pesticides per se are used much in urban environments. I don't know. And then on the wider use for agricultural usages, we talk about the pesticide side, but we very rarely look at nutrients. All cells require nutrients, and if they don't get them, they're not healthy, and that feeds through into plants. So if you give plants adequate minerals, you get disease resistance, you get fungal resistance, you get pest resistance, and this was all work done in the 1930s and 40s that we've kind of forgotten about, which feeds through into utilising and finding ways to compost sewage and get the pharmacological products out so that can be reapplied to the land, and possibly doing experiments on foliar sprays, seaweed-based or other mineral sources to try and find ways of giving plants the nutrients they need so they can be healthy, provide us with healthy food and disease, pest and virus, fungus.
Thank you. That's a very good point, and also it brings us to soil as well, and nutrients in soil, not just what we're bringing from above, but what they're getting from within the soil. Do you deal in replenishing the poor quality of soil, and putting nutrients into the soil again?
I read widely on historic forgotten research, or if I kind of before the Second World War, they were focusing. I just read widely on the subject. For the Second World War, they were focusing heavily because they didn't have the modern industrial products that we use today on ways of getting nutrition into the soil and getting very strong results that if the soils were well nourished, then the plant yields were better, the plant health was better, animal health was better. And this is particularly the work of Sir Michael Howard in India, who was trying to find applicable ways for small farmers to improve their crop yields. And that science is all there, but we have forgotten about it, and there are people that might be regarded as a bit wacky and fruity, for example, who are using the remnants of sea salt production as a foliar spray and getting good results, yet because it's regarded as a bit wacky, we don't have ongoing research into the subjects. I mean, grinding up stone was used by the Germans in the late 1800s as a soil additive, but we can't go grinding up mountains, and there are relatively few opportunities to actually remineralize plants apart from getting organic matter back there, and possibly the use of the remnants of sea salt might be one as foliar sprays. But if plants don't have the, like our cells, if they don't have the nutrients they need, enzymes don't function, and they are going to be more susceptible to pests and fungi.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent point, because we're going about it the way of pesticides and killing pests. But what about the quality of the nutrients going into the plants and also into the soil?
Well, I only know there's a lot of research, and in our small municipality we have an increasing interest, and also more farmers that use conservation of tillage, and to actually revive the soil, where you have more, what do you call it, that we work with the soil quality. So there's a lot of research going on, and there's a lot of interest in it. But I suppose you have more comments on it.
Thank you. What I would like to propose you is to a bit further discuss this in the break, if you don't mind. I think René will explain where we can network. There is a possibility.
That's a very good idea. I encourage all of you, once the session's over, but not yet, to go downstairs where there are networking areas with coffees and so on, to seek out these two and to actually hash out and feed in your ideas, because the EU will take into account, they're building up their directive, and they will be very happy to hear your ideas, and that one is a very good one. So thank you for that. And moving on, I'm very encouraged to see that this Connects Me app is actually working. So our next question is from Julie Delacroix, who says, what further research and innovation is needed for green cities and healthy citizens? What further research? You've been dealing with 100,000 cases, so what would you say? Dora.
Well, this is a very good question. I think one important aspect is looking into what kind of business models can support the development of green cities and healthier cities. So looking into not only how the municipalities or the local governments can support the development, but how businesses can be encouraged or how citizens can be involved. This is one aspect. And another aspect that could be interesting is the actual assessment of how, for example, nature-based solutions or greener solutions actually contribute to greener cities. So to look into what are the actual health impact of nature-based solutions, or how they are impacting, we didn't talk much about this, but how they are impacting social justice or social equity in cities and so on. So these are aspects that I think it's important to look into further.
Besides suggesting blue in addition to green, I would also recommend that there's a whole issue going off of what Dora just said about access. So clearly, the poorer you are in our cities and countries, the less access you often have to healthy green spaces. And the other piece would be about the quality of the space. And you've alluded to it, a number of but what types of green space are best, and what are the risks and benefits of different types of green space? For example, people who are allergic to certain types of plants may have a very different attitude towards a green space than people who aren't.
David, you've got something to add?
Yeah, maybe something that will be interesting to think that now research is moving to multiple exposure at the same time. When we are actually in the city, we are not exposed to a single pollutant or a single exposure. We're exposed to a mix of things. Then we need to think in how we can approach in a better way this complexity of exposure. What is the urban environment is more than a single thing. It's a multiple things that happens at the same time. And one of the projects that I presented to you was the Exposon project. And the Exposon means multiple exposure at the same time, and how to approach and define what is actually happening when you have a multiple doses of exposure at the same time in different parts of your life, and what it will imply for the future of you, what your actual health and the long-term health, and to try to also link that with policy. What will means for urban design? What will means for urban policies? Exposon will try to answer these questions and try to characterize better what is actually the cities around the world will mean in terms of multiple exposure. I think this is something that we are wanting to see in the future research environment.
So I have a. Is it working?
Yeah.
So I have an advertisement on the Exposon. We actually will have a call now that will open now in July, and it's quite a large amount of money we are putting into this, 50 million euros. And what we want to do within this call for proposals is to see how the Exposon concept can be applied to specific case studies. And we have given some examples, for example, waste. How can you measure, if you live around a contaminated site, the exposures of the people and what are the possible health risks? Then we mentioned also indoor air quality. If you live in a very polluted indoor environment, what could be the long-term health effects? Noise, I think, is also mentioned as one example. And then occupational health. If you work in a particular occupational environment, what could be the risks, long-term health risks? So this call will open in July.
Excellent.
Sorry, I was also asked by my colleagues in another directorate to advertise a prize that will be on early warning for epidemics and prediction of vector-borne diseases, how they will spread, especially within the context of climate change.
And before we leave the subject, David, you hinted about different stages in life. Is it worse if you are a child exposed? You get so much asthma these days from bad air and so on. Are children more vulnerable at that stage in their life, or are we vulnerable at every stage?
It's important to highlight the vulnerability of the life through the life, and it's definitely there are key windows of susceptibility when even during pregnancy you have the different trimesters, different parts of the body that is developing, and when you are exposed in different trimesters, you will develop different diseases if you were exposed to different pollutants, or then definitely exists this vulnerability. And of course, during the first years of life, you have also these deterministic patterns that will affect and could increase the risk in the adulthood. But I also wanted to highlight the importance that in the case of air pollution, even those that we feel that we are not vulnerable and we are adults and we are healthy, we are suffering from these exposures. There are pollutants that are affecting everyone, and even if you are not vulnerable or you don't perceive yourself as a vulnerable people, we are suffering of air pollution, like air pollution, and I want to highlight air pollution because we have a crisis of public health in terms of air pollution, and this is affecting not only those that have a disease or there's children or the pregnant woman, if not everyone. We are affecting and we are losing quality of life and quantity of life because we're exposed to these kind of pollutants. Then it's important to highlight when is the key windows of opportunity to improve or reduce exposure, but definitely we need policies that apply to everyone at the same time because this is affecting to the whole population.
Thank you, David. And actually, we, in the southwest of England, we're in the countryside, a big area of Dartmoor National Park, they put a measurement in to measure the pollution, and it was as high as the cities because the air was being blown across the park, so that's quite scary. The question at the back there, I think. Oh, I thought this gentleman put his hand up. He was right. Next questions, please. Don't be shy because we only have a few minutes left, and you'll regret any question you didn't ask, probably. So, if you've got something niggling away there, just come out with it. I'd be interested to know. If not, yes. Thank you.
I would like to ask a question mainly to Laura and Dora. So I'm Vitalia Petri from Mons University and would like to know how do you connect blue health and green health, and what are initiatives at the moment are ongoing? Thank you.
It's somewhat artificial, right? In other words, there are very few places that are purely without blue or green, but it's just that the focus has initially been on green as the more common exposure to many people across the world. Having said that, when you start to think about things like fountains, rivers, canals, lakes, ponds, even things, you know, there's clearly a mixture in all of our environments. And I think what we're trying to do in Blue Health is to try and just raise the profile of blue environments relative to green. I will mention that there is some psychology-based laboratory research that does show that people, even people who've grown up in desert areas, respond most positively to blue as opposed to green or urban environments, in other words, with nothing in them. But I think for all of us, the mixture is actually what's really important, and looking at the co-benefits that they can provide for us.
So in our project, we mostly approached green spaces as nature-based solutions, but we saw that many of the projects actually include blue within the cities, so it doesn't have to be the coast, but there are rivers, lakes, and smaller streams also, which can be considered as part of the blue health issue. But what was interesting is that many of the cities are now integrating rivers and lakes as part of the everyday life. So we saw a lot of projects where they reopened previously earlier covered rivers, or they integrated coastal areas in the city life so that people has easier access. Or I just saw yesterday a project in Utrecht where they previously designed an area, a big living area, then around the area a green space, and after that there was the river. Now they realized that access to the river would be also very valuable to the citizens, so now they are opening up the access to the river. So I think it's a mixture of the two, actually.
I have one other thing I want to... The other thing is there are specific risks, and I'm emphasizing a lot the benefits, but there are specific risks to water bodies than there are to green spaces. So you don't usually find ticks in water bodies, but you may find microbial pollution in water bodies. So I think there's also that balance in terms of risk.
Thank you very much. And incidentally, I'm interested, there is another hand, so I'll be very quick, in the idea, if we have water shortage in the future, which is predicted, how does that fit in with Blue Health?
Well, it could be argued that the planet is actually predominantly blue. So from the planetary point of view, there's a lot of blue. Clearly, the issue of drinking water, of potable water, is becoming more and more of an issue. One way to approach this is to use things like desalination, but again, all things have risks and benefits. I think one thing that both blue and green environments make me realize is that we need to value these resources, and we need to think of them not just in terms of the context of what they directly benefit our health and well-being, but also if we want them to be of good quality and to exist beyond us to other generations, we have to make some certain sort of selfless decisions going forward about green, blue spaces and water.
Thank you very much. We're getting super questions. There was one over there.
Yes, thank you. Jay from The Hague. We're having this challenge in the city of The Hague where we have very green areas and blue areas, but people with a very low income, with bad health, live in those areas, and it's become very difficult to get them involved, if at all, get them out of their houses, get them involved in nature. And it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation where we know that it would be good for them to come out, but they have so many physical and mental issues that it's difficult for them to come out. So do you have any good practices or tips on how we can deal with that?
That's a super question, because people are tending to sit indoors to feel safe, and they're also watching their screens and their computers, so off you go.
I mean, I think there'll be a bunch of examples from all of us, and I think part of it is having examples. But for example, in Plymouth, which is a relatively poor city on the coast of UK, we've been working with the local council, local universities, the National Marine Aquarium, and the local community to try and restore an area. And I think the big trick is to try and involve the local community. And that means working with community activists, it means working with the schools, with religious groups. It's like any type of community activism, you have to get everybody involved to do it. And different people have different triggers. So for some people it can be it's good for your children's health, for the others it could be it's good for your health, or it's good for your community. So I don't think there's a simple answer, but like all of these things, I think you need the activity of all and involvement of all the community, if possible.
I think it's very important to understand the reasons behind why they don't want to get out. So there can be different reasons. But for example, we saw a lot of projects in Germany where community gardens were established especially for different vulnerable groups. So for example, children, but older people, or immigrants, refugees. And this worked really well because they get involved. So they were targeted specifically, and then they got involved, and then they understood themselves the benefits of green space.
Sorry. And well, I'm part of the Pasta and Helix. I'm also part of Blue Health. And we are working, assessing an intervention in the river in Barcelona. They improve the infrastructure to access the river. They make a bike path and pedestrian area, and the green area near to the river that was very bad, and don't have accessibility. And in the neighborhoods in Barcelona, there is more disadvantages, social disadvantages. And we make interviews to the people who live in there, and to try to see also who is using this infrastructure. And we have seen that most of the users are local population, that the people who live in these neighborhoods. And just given access and improving the aesthetics is just attracting the actual local community to use this, to really feel like they own this part of the neighborhood now. The river is part of the house, like the dimension of when the neighborhood starts and ends, this is the river is part of this neighborhood. Then this feeling that also produce activities to bring the people to do activities in this infrastructure, they can see, they can use it more. I think this is the first step. There are many campaigns that you can attract, and you can identify who are the more vulnerable, or the people through the interviews. You can see that older people there is the ones that maybe they're not very attracted to this kind of infrastructure, but when you put benches and you put on maybe a bathroom, when you see why are the reason they don't use the infrastructure, is because they don't have a bench in 20 minutes walking. Then they need something to sit, because they cannot walk 20 minutes, and maybe they need a bathroom. And these kind of things, there are simple solutions that can attract more populations.
Gosh, time is unfortunately catching up with us, so what I'm going to do is ask each person just to have one sentence only in what their hopes are for the future. Really, one sentence.
I hope that if we appreciate what the natural environment can give to us, that we will give back to the natural environment.
Yeah, I hope that if nature-based solutions and nature-based urban innovation really pick up, then it can really improve the overall health and the life quality in cities across Europe.
I think the future, for my perspective, is the exposome. To try to think that the cities are more than a single problem. There's a complexity, and we need a comprehensive solution, and try to see a multiple solution of policies that see a change in multiple exposures.
I hope that in the future we will work even more closely in the sustainable use of pesticides in Europe.
I hope that we plan and build our cities in a way that pesticides are not needed within them.
Well, thank you so much. It's been very stimulating. I think we could go on for a double session here because there's so many good ideas. But I wonder myself what the city of the future might look like. Will we, for instance, be going around in driverless cars? Will we be going on bicycles, on electric bicycles? Will we be walking? Will we be with drones? Will there be hyperloops instead of cars, so we'll be going in the air above each other and not crashing around on the road? Will there be robots mowing the lawns in our public parks? Possibly robots pulling out all the poisonous plants that won't come out with pesticides anymore, and city wildlife, green roofs, food growing in our cities, which would be amazing, clean rivers, clean lakes, a very quiet environment without all the noise, peaceful, safe, happy places where children can play everywhere and not be worried, and probably all of us being digital nomads, which means we'll be on our computers, able to work anywhere in the world, not having to commute to work anymore and polluting the environment, working in cafes and parks. So it's given us a chance to dream a little bit, and also a bit of reality as well, a lot of reality. It's been fantastic to hear all our... Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you. You've been a terrific audience. You've come up with great questions. You've been very attentive. I've watched you just gripped by it. It's been great. Thank you to each one of our speakers. A special thanks to Dr. Tuomo Kaajalainen, who masterminded all of this meticulously to make sure we got the order, the facts, and that's why it ran so smoothly. Thank you very much. Also to Dora and Laura, lucky to David, to Piroshka and to Marlin. And don't forget, you can talk to Piroshka and Marlin with your pesticides ideas in the networking area. You can also talk to all the other experts who'll be going to network. I'd also like to thank those very quiet, invisible bodies behind you, the interpreters, who have not really had a mention. So for France, Simon and Lucille; for the UK, Kim and Michael; for Germany, Anja and Anna Clara. And then if you think this is happening without any technology, well, you should see what goes into it. So I'd like to thank the technicians, Philippe and his team, Alexi, Ulysse, Leonardo, Antonio, Clement, and the man with the mic and a lot of other work, Felix. He's been amazing. Also the staff at the Blue Point Centre, who've enabled all this, and it's a lovely centre. I mean, I'm sure much nicer than where we've been in the past. Don't forget, if you've got headsets, to return them to where you got them from, and don't forget to discuss things further and feel stimulated and keep up the flame of hope. So now, on behalf of the Directorate General for the Environment of the European Commission, thank you so much for listening, and I very much hope to see some of you in the future. Thank you.